Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Daniel. I am the owner and founder of the Raminfard School of Arts. And today what we're going to be focusing on is a drawing of the head straight on. I have found this particular position to be probably one of the most difficult positions to draw. It can get really challenging to get really good, clean symmetry. So my goal in the demo for today isn't so much to get accuracy. I'm not looking to make the person look exactly like the picture. That's a whole different story. But the reference that we're going to be working off of is a person with a good deal of symmetry. And so that's why I chose that particular model. We're going to be working step by step, and we're going to be working based on the model that I've already set up for you guys. And by model I mean the way of drawing. So the way of drawing based on the first video that I put out regarding the head. So if you haven't seen that on structure, the front view, I think it's called Head Drawing 1. If you haven't seen that, please watch that first. Once you have a good understanding of creating that structure and proportions, then we can get into the nuances of drawing the head. So this is by no means a complete drawing, but it's definitely a complete sketch. The difference being in to what degree I refine the drawing. So I would say I'm getting it up to about 80% and I'm leaving it there. So my hope in creating this video is for you guys to get a better understanding of how to draw the head. If you have any questions, please let me know. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share. And I am very excited to show you this video, so hopefully you guys enjoy it. Drawing the head is not an easy task. It requires us to really slow down and pay very close attention to nuanced shapes. But as I've mentioned in previous videos, the most important thing is that we work A, from large shapes into small shapes, and B, from the most simple shapes into the most complex. Those two principles are going to be reiterated over and over and over again throughout almost every video that I make. And the reason is because it's impossible to get the small shapes right unless they're inside of a certain amount of context, and that context are the larger shapes. So what I'm doing right now is I'm drawing my circle. I'm getting my line down right down the center, and I'm being very careful to make sure that that lines up. As I'm doing this, I want to mention the materials that I'm working on, which is tan tone paper. I have a colored sepia colored pencil, and later I'm actually going to use a white colored pencil as well. I'm trying to get my thirds out, which should be very, very familiar information to you guys. If it's not, then you should go back to that video that I mentioned earlier in the introduction. And I'm just taking it step by step. I'm looking carefully at the sides of the head, and I'm trying to put together something that already resembles the head that I'm drawing. Now, as I mentioned in the introduction, I have no intent whatsoever to make this face look exactly like the model. My whole intent is to use it as a reference for me to develop good, clean form, good, clean shapes, and for you guys to see what it's like to actually draw out this form step by step by step. Now, I do get close to a likeness, but that's not my big concern. Drawing to the likeness of somebody and really making it look like the individual takes a ton of practice, and I don't recommend looking for that when you first start drawing faces. The first and foremost objective is to make it look human. I can't stress that enough. In other words, you've got good proportions, good placement, everything looks like it's right where it belongs, good symmetry, good values, all of that stuff. So as I continue to draw this, I'm going to refine the shape just a touch more. You'll notice that I'm constantly going over and over and over each part of the drawing, and I'm measuring things. I can't stress enough how important it is to measure, make sure that sizing looks right. By no means am I trying to make this the exact same size as the picture. The only reason why I'm trying to get something close to it is so that it fits within the frame of the video. So what I'm doing now is putting in the side planes, and I'm looking carefully to see where the temples line up on the head, as well as where the chin rolls up towards the ear. Those are the key markers that help me get a clear understanding of where the side planes of the head are. So once I have those things, now I can actually move into the features of the head. Again, all of this is a review from my previous video, but I am more than happy to review it, as it is very, very important to know before you get into the actual features. So what I'm doing is I'm actually getting a lot of placement and a lot of structure in there. Way more than I actually need. There's a certain point where you keep on drawing that you don't actually need all of these lines, but I'm putting it there for you so you can see how things line up. Because if you don't have that information, if you don't have a good understanding of all of that, you can get stuck and you just end up giving up and never learn how to draw the head. So that's the whole point of really looking carefully of how things lock together, how things line up, and where they all belong. Notice those two marks that I just made and the marks that I'm making in between, and the idea is to get 3 eyes to fit in that space. So I'm trying to get 3 eyes, 1 eye distance of the nose, and then the 2 eyes in between, and that's usually a good way of spacing out your eyes within that eye frame. So that line down the middle where I'm bringing in these curves, that's the bottom of the eyelid, or I should say it's the top of the bottom eyelid, and now I'm bringing in a connection from that into where the brows are, or at least the brow bone, and then I'm distinguishing that from the nose. Having done that, I'm now actually drawing in what is the lower part of the brow bone. A lot of people confuse that with the top part of the upper eyelid, but you don't really see that. It's usually the brow bone covering the eyelid. I'm coming in for the nose. I'm getting in some sense of where the nostrils are, and then there's a connection between those two, and it's basically where the bone, the cartilage of the nose, the base of the nose is. So we want that rhythmic line going across, just to kind of separate one part from the other. And you'll see why as I continue to draw. It actually will help in terms of indicating some of the muscle that wraps around the cheeks. So now it's time for me to get into the eyes themselves. And I'm going to draw the larger shape first. Again, this is the big shape of the eye, meaning the lining around the eye lid. And then I'm going to get into the actual interior lines of the eye. So I'm looking for the largest shape that composes the eye. And as you can see, then comes the bottom line of that top lid. As I draw this, I'm looking carefully at angles. I'm thinking critically about spacing. I'm trying to make sure that it works well in terms of the distance from one eye to the other, in terms of the distance going up and down. I'm looking at the lids and the shadow that they create. Now I'm bringing in a little bit of shading. And then as I draw the iris, what I'm actually doing is looking at the whites of the eye to make sure that those are well proportioned. So I want to make sure that I'm actually creating the white shapes before I get into my concern of how round I'm actually making those irises. As I draw the brow in, I'm just kind of putting in a temporary shape. And as I'm commenting on the video, watching it, I'm noticing that my brow line is just slightly off. The brow needs to be a little bit longer going up, and then it's turned. But again, this is not my major concern in this video. All I'm really trying to do is show you the method. That's what matters to me, and that's what matters to my students, is understanding the method. The rest is just a matter of practice. One of the things that I've done is I've sped up the video, but even as I'm drawing, I'm actually moving pretty quickly. My normal drawing speed is very, very slow, and I'm an incredibly impatient person, but I've learned the hard way how important it is for me to slow down. because if I don't, I can get myself in a lot of trouble. So I'm just getting some basic placement, having figured out where the chin is because that's one of the next major shapes. Then I figure out where my top and bottom of my lip is, and then that's where I bring in that line that kind of divides the two pieces. Notice that my line curves downwards, and it's not because I think my model is sad or depressed. It's just to show the curvature of the mouth. As soon as I bring in that line, then I'll adjust it, and it'll look a lot more like the person that I'm actually drawing. So the basic mechanics of my drawing are there, and my lines look relatively good. So I'm ready to start actually adding value. I'm going to clean up the drawing a little bit, but then I'm going to start adding some preliminary value. And the reason why I do that is just so that I can see my shapes better. So I'm going to clean up my drawing. I'm going to make sure that my lines look nice and clean. And then what I'm going to do is start to add some tone. So the idea behind adding the value or the tone is just so that I can see my shapes better. That's really my only concern. So I'm always going to be driven by shapes. So I'm getting that in there. So I'll shade in the lip, and then I'll shade in underneath the bottom lip just to give me some sense of what's going on there. A little bit of adjustment in terms of the shape, which is tinkering, very important. You want to tinker as you draw. Play with it until it feels right. And now I'm going to add in some value for the eyes, for the irises, and look around and see what else I can find to give me a better sense of shapes, of simple shapes, of things that make sense to me, things that look similar. I'm now starting to draw in some of the more nuanced shapes here, and getting some sense of what's going on with the nose, what's going on with the eyes. And now I'm going to place my ears in. Okay, so the ears are really an afterthought. And the reason is because if you're focused on somebody's face, the ears are actually out of focus. So you don't want to bring in too much detail there. I'm also looking to see if the spacing is correct for the hair as I draw in the hair. And I'm going to take a measurement, and lo and behold, the hairline all the way up to the top of the hair is the same distance as the forehead itself. So that's how I'm getting that sizing. Because hair takes on almost any form, I am not a stickler for getting the exact shape. So I don't kill myself to get it perfect. I usually go for something very similar. That said, if I'm doing a commission, I am going to try and make it look like the hair as close as possible for my client. And the only reason is because they expect it to look just like the picture that they've given me. So no problem. I'll put in the extra effort. But for a sketch, I'm not going to kill myself to get the shape of the hair perfect. What matters are the features, that they're placed right, they're well proportioned, the face looks right inside of the context of the head, and we're pretty much done once that's been accomplished. The next step for me after I've done all of this and I have a complete line drawing is to dig into the values. And the way that I draw my values is I actually start by shadow mapping. So I'm bringing in two lines that indicate the sockets of the eye, and I'm starting to kind of circle around that. And I'm slowly going to indicate where there's light and where there's dark. And so that's what these lines are now that are coming in. This is a clear indication of the side plane that's lit. And I'm just taking it nice and slow to make sure that I've got a really good understanding of what is going to be colored in with the white pencil and what is actually going to be shaded in with the pencil that I have in my hand, which is the dark sepia. So I'll spend just a few minutes getting in some of the lines within the ear. And again, I want to remind you guys not to make this the focus. And you'll see that as I draw, I really don't put too much detail into the ears. Having said that, we don't want it to be void of any details. We just want it to be less evident than the rest of the face. Now I can actually start to think about shading through the entire form, which is what I'm going to do now. So this means that everything that's in shadow, I'm literally just going to give a wash of color using the side of my pencil. Okay, so having done that, I am now going to use a blender. This is a twisted up piece of newsprint that comes in various sizes. You can buy it at any art store. And the whole idea of using this blender is to really get a nice, clean, even tone. So I'm just cleaning up my shading via the blender. Okay, so having put down a base tone for the shadows, I'm now going to look for things that I can darken. This includes areas such as the eyes, the nose, the mouth, basically the features. I'm not going to get too much into the hair because I just feel like that is really an afterthought for the purposes of what we're doing here, which is trying to understand the head, placement, and features. Now, I plan on a separate video in which I really dig into the fundamental drawing of the features, including the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the lips, which is a great exercise for any artist at any level to do. Just focusing on individual features of the face at as many different angles as possible. So that will come in a completely different video. But for now, really what I'm doing is I'm just trying to give my drawing some depth by adding in some of these darker tones and looking to see where else there may be some light. But the real key here is to darken those areas that are darkest in order for me to give some depth to the form. So I'm not going to get too much into shading technique because that's a whole separate video as well. But I am going to speed this up so that we can get to the next segment of this drawing, which is adding in white. Now, when I add in my white, it's going to change this drawing dramatically. And the reason is because we see things comparatively. So once I add in this white pencil, suddenly everything else is going to look darker by comparison. And you'll notice that's exactly why I don't get too crazy with my darks. That's one of the biggest mistakes that almost everybody makes, is that they add too much dark, and then when they add their light colors on something like a tan tone paper or a gray tone paper, all of a sudden everything seems way out of whack because the addition of those lighter tones definitely changes how we perceive the darker tones that we've added previously. So I'm careful not to overdo it, and I actually underplay my whites so that it doesn't get too intense. So it's very much a seesaw effect. I'm looking to get a good balance between three major categories of shading, which is my lights, my mediums, and my darks. There's a video that I have out on Light Logic, which kind of breaks all of this down, and I highly recommend watching it. I think it's only 7 minutes or so, but it's been a really good video to watch for my students here at the studio, as well as people abroad who've really found some value in that. So I definitely think that's something that you'd wanna watch. So pick that video up after this and see what's going on there. Now, as for the hair, I have no intent whatsoever to shade all of that in. The hair is very, very time consuming. It's tedious work. And again, this is just a sketch. It actually borders between a drawing and a sketch because of how much detail I'm starting to put in. So a sketch is intended to just get the basic idea down with as few lines as possible, whereas a drawing is something that is much more in-depth and much more thought out with a high degree of resolve. This is something that is commonly talked about in ateliers among artists and in art schools. Resolve is the degree of detail that we bring into a particular part of our drawing or painting. So we have to just be conscious of how far we want to push things. For this video, I don't think that it's worth pushing it much farther. I'm just going to continue to add a bit more details in here and then leave it somewhere right before I would
I would get into what I would call serious fine tuning. Now again, my goal was not to get an exact likeness of the person. I think we got close, but I really don't care about getting it looking exactly like the person. That's a whole different process. What matters to me is that you guys understand the procedural effect of building this thing out and bringing it in step by step. Last thing that I just wanted to mention is I used my white pencil right there to bring in those highlights on the eyes. Even though they're not there, I just think it makes the drawing look pretty. I'm using a blender to soften things up just a bit more, and that pretty much wraps up my drawing. For those of you who stuck through, thank you for watching. I hope to see you in the next video.